Tirisfal Glades is the home to the Forsaken and the starting zone for all undead players. It's tucked away at the northernmost point of the accessible classic zones, and its environment consists primarily of dark and dreary forests, abandoned farmlands, and of course the mass graves. In lore, it was once home to the human kingdom of Lordaeron, but after the betrayal of Prince Arthas Menethil, who later became the Lich King, the kingdom fell victim to the Scourge, with the majority of the population succumbing to the plague of undeath. In this video, we'll be covering the story of Tirisfal Glades as it's presented in WoW Classic, or in other words, the original story prior to the zone's revamp during the Cataclysm expansion. Of course, there may be some variability in your own experiences with these quests, depending on the order in which you complete them, and I've also included a few minor explanations of my own to smoothly explain the connection between certain quest lines, but I've done my best to tie everything together as neatly as possible in a way that isn't majorly intrusive to any of the storylines. If it's helpful, I'll also display this marker in the corner of the screen anytime I say something that isn't directly implied in-game. But first, let's cover some historical context. 3 years prior to the events of World of Warcraft, due to the weakening of the Lich King Ner'zhul, caused by the demon hunter Illidan Stormrage, the Death Knight Arthas Menethil was called back to Northrend in order to protect the Frozen Throne. This combination of Arthas' absence and the weakening of Ner'zhul allowed for a faction of undead, led by the Banshee Queen Sylvanas Windrunner, to break free from the Lich King's control, starting a civil war in the northern part of the Eastern Kingdoms between her newly freed Forsaken and the forces of the Scourge led by 3 dreadlords known as Varimathras, Deathrok, and Balnazar. Varimathras, however, upon being defeated by the Banshee Queen and her forces, would ultimately end up betraying his fellow Nathrazim, becoming Sylvanas' lieutenant and offering key information about the other dreadlords in exchange for his life. And in the end, Sylvanas and her Forsaken were able to triumph over Deathrok and Balnazar, earning their freedom and choosing to settle within the ruins of Lordaeron. From the undead introductory cutscene, we also learn that, though they've broken free from the Lich King, the Forsaken face the constant battle of maintaining their freedom from the Scourge, while also having to protect themselves from any living threats that consider them monsters, such as the Scarlet Crusade. In recent years, however, they've formed an alliance of convenience with the primitive members of the Horde, although they hold no true loyalty to any cause other than their own. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to the story presented in-game. When you awake, you find yourself in a dimly lit tomb, and upon emerging, you are met by the caretaker of the Deathknell Crypts, Undertaker Mordo. Mordo explains that you almost didn't wake up, and that had you not, your remains would have been burned. He also informs you that you are no longer a slave of the Lich King, and in your confused state, you follow Mordo's guidance to speak with Shadow Priest Sarvis in the chapel down the hill. When you reach him, Sarvis echoes Mordo's words, adding that it was the Dark Lady Sylvanas who freed the Forsaken, and that she is the one who guides the war against the Scourge and against any of the living who seek to destroy them. Admittedly, these interactions raise an interesting question about the origin of the undead player character. According to the timeline, the events of Classic generally take place in year 25 ADP, meaning after the Dark Portal, when the Orcs first invaded Azeroth. However, Sylvanas and the Forsaken broke free from Arthas' control during the events of Warcraft 3, sometime during year 22. So why are you only now learning of your freedom? At this point in time, the Forsaken have no way of raising new Forsaken, and Mordo seems to imply that you were once a servant of the Lich King, so this can't really mean that you're only now being brought back to life. The most likely explanation is that you were a citizen of Tirisfal and that you succumbed to the plague, causing you to be brought back to life as a servant of the Scourge. Although, this still doesn't really explain why you were asleep in the Deathknell Crypt, nor does it explain why you spontaneously woke up 3 years after the Forsaken broke free. Nevertheless, Sarvis immediately puts you to work in service of the Dark Lady, by asking you to help clear the northern part of the village of Mindless Scourge. As you work to push them back, an undead woman named Elrith, a novice to Sarvis, also asks for some assistance, offering to find you some armor if you bring her some scavenger paws and duskbat wings. Upon delivering the requested materials, she then tells you of a friend she had before the plague named Marla. In a tragic fate of events, as a result of the plague, Marla's husband Samuel became infected, causing him to turn into a zombie and murder Marla. She was later buried in the Deathknell Cemetery, and while fortunately she was never raised into undeath, her dying wish was to be buried with her husband. In order to honor this last wish, Elrith asks you to slay the mindless Samuel and to bury his remains with those of Marla. Around the same time, you're also approached by Deathguard Sultane, who tasks you with scavenging equipment crates from the abandoned homes of Deathknell, as they'll be vital for equipping other freshly woken recruits, indicating that there are other Forsaken who will awake just as you did. You also end up speaking to Executor Aran, who tells you about Nightweb's Hollow, a nearby gold mine. Ideally, the location would be quite a valuable resource, but recently it's been overrun with spiders. After doing your part to aid in the clearing of the cave, Aran informs you of a detachment of Scarlet Crusaders that's been setting up a camp nearby. Scarlet Crusade, as he explains, is an organization set on destroying all undead, Scourge and free-willed Forsaken alike. To prevent them from gaining any ground, you must take arms and strike first, and after weakening their settlement, Aran then tells you about a report from the nearby Forsaken town of Brill, informing him that there's an agent among those in the Scarlet camp that has important documents on his person. Though not quite sure what these documents are, Aran sends you to obtain them, and upon bringing them back, Aran notices a map detailing key information on several of the Crusade's field commanders and agents. As this information could help the Forsaken deal a decisive blow against the Crusade, Aran orders you to deliver the documents to his superior, Executor Zygand, in Brill. As you make your way out of Deathknell, you're stopped by Calvin Montague, who's been tasked with delivering a letter to the innkeeper in Brill, and he offers you a large reward to complete this task for him. Not long after, you encounter a fork in the road patrolled by Deathguard Simmer, who points out the nearby human-owned farm next to a settlement of Scarlet Crusaders. As a way to prove your worth and to teach you the ways of the Forsaken, Simmer tasks you with stealing some of their pumpkins and delivering them to Apothecary Johann in Brill. After securing a few pumpkins and turning back towards Brill, you also encounter a large abomination by the name of Gordo. His master, Junior Apothecary Holland, has tasked him with collecting gloomweed, and he forcibly enlists your assistance, explaining that if you help him, he won't hurt you. Finally, after collecting a few weeds, you reach Brill with your various deliveries. The most important one seems to be the Scarlet documents, so you take them straight to Executor Zygand in the center of town. He tells you that you've done well in delivering the locations of the Scarlet officers, but that before striking at their leaders, you must first drive back their forces near the Saladin farm, which you recognize to be the same farm you stole pumpkins from earlier. Upon offering the gloomweed to Gordo's master Holland, the junior apothecary frustratingly tells you that Gordo has mistakenly been gathering gloomweed, when in reality the herb he needs is doomweed, and he hires you to collect some, telling you that it can be found near the mass graves to the north. When you talk to Apothecary Johann, he explains that the Dark Lady has tasked the Royal Apothecary Society with creating a new plague deadlier than any ailment known on Azeroth, one that will destroy even the Scourge. When you give him the pumpkins, he then laces one with his latest plague formula, asking you to test it on the captured Scarlet Zealot that's being held prisoner in the cellar of the inn. He also asks you to bring him some blood samples from the nearby Darkhounds, as his research has pointed towards the blood of beasts being the key to this new plague. As you make your way into the inn to deliver the plague-laced pumpkin, you pass innkeeper Renee and give her the letter Calvin Montague was supposed to deliver. She takes it, claiming it to be from her mother in Deathknell, but when you seem confused at her cheery tone, she assumes you didn't buy into her story and rudely sends you off, explaining that regardless of who it's actually from, it's none of your business, and she tells you to come back once you have some actual money to spend. When you descend into the cellar, the Scarlet Zealot immediately shouts for you to leave, begging for the light to protect him, but eventually succumbs to his hunger when he sees the pumpkin. When he devours it, he briefly transforms into a mindless ghoul before dying only seconds later. On the way out, you take a brief look upstairs and speak with Gretchen Deadmar, who serves the Forsaken by sewing up body bags for the fallen soldiers. However, she has slowly been succumbing to the plague of undeath, and admits that soon she will fall to the mindless state. As a side effect of this involves intense chills, she asks you to bring her some duskbat pelts in order to sew herself a blanket so that she may serve the Dark Lady to the very end. Before leaving town, you also spot a wanted poster outside the town hall for a gnoll by the name of Maggot Eye, who has supposedly been stealing corpses for the Lich King's army. Upon entering the town hall, you meet Magistrate Severin, who tells you about more gnolls near the mass graves who have also been stealing corpses, and he asks you to kill them and to bring back the embalming ichor that they've been using to raise the dead. On your way out of town, you also speak with Deathguard Dillinger, who asks you to cull some of the mindless Scourge near Cold Hearth Manor, which you passed on the way into Brill, and to bring back some of their claws as proof of their demise. Having collected a variety of tasks to complete from the denizens of Brill, there are a few different directions in which you could go. To the north is Garren's Haunt, where you can find the Doomweed for Junior Apothecary Holland, as well as the corpse-stealing gnolls Magistrate Severin told you about. To the far east is the Scarlet Outpost near Saladin Farm, where Executor Zygand has asked you to begin the offensive against the Crusade. Slightly closer to town, to the east, is Cold Hearth Manor, where Deathguard Dillinger has asked you to slay Mindless Scourge. You've also been asked to collect Darkhound blood for Apothecary Johann and Duskbat pelts for Gretchen, but as these creatures can be found throughout Tirisfal, you decide to collect these reagents as you travel from task to task. But, since the Scourge near Cold Hearth Manor seem to be the most pressing threat to the town, you decide to pursue this task first before heading back to the Saladin Farm to deal with the Scarlet Crusaders. And after dealing a heavy blow to their forces, you decide to head back to Brill to report your deeds and to resupply before heading to Garren's Haunt. And on your way back, you also decide to make a quick pit stop to collect your reward from Calvin Montague for delivering his letter. Although, when you attempt to claim it, Calvin claims that he never owed you any money and instigates a fight. It's only after he loses that he hands over a few copper pieces, admitting that he never had a large reward to offer in the first place. Back in Brill, upon reporting back to Executor Zygand, he then informs you of another settlement of Scarlet Crusaders to the southwest, led by a Captain Perrine, and asks you to wipe them out. Having overheard from Zygand of your deeds against the Crusade, a death guard named Burgess approaches you about collecting Scarlet insignias as you continue your work for the Executor to prove your loyalty to the Dark Lady and to Varimathras, her Dreadlord servant. You also make a stop at Apothecary Johann's place to drop off the collected Darkhound blood. He thanks you for your efforts, but admits that while you were collecting blood samples, he realized that there are some other necessary reagents he needs to perfect his concoction, and asks you to collect some scales from the Vilefin Murlocs along the coast. After turning in the claws of the slain Scourge from Cold Hearth Manor, Deathguard Dillinger messenger tells you about another, more threatening pack of Scourge forming a base at the Agamand Mills. He asks you to help clear them out and to bring back their bones. Before heading out, you also make one last stop at the inn to bring Gretchen her duskbat pelts, but on your way out, you're stopped by Coleman Farthing, who used to work at the Agamand Mills before succumbing to the plague. He explains that the Agamands were the most prosperous family in Tirisfal, and that when the Scourge first attacked, they refused to leave their home, convincing all in their employ to stay with them and defend the property. But in the end, their pride failed them, and all those present fell to the plague, and although some have become forsaken, like Coleman, the Agamands continue to roam as mindless minions of the Scourge. Full of resentment towards the family, Coleman asks you to slay them and bring back their remains, giving particular emphasis towards the remains of Devlin Agamand, the younger of the two Agamand sons, who he describes as being a weak and sharp-tongued man and the first to succumb to the plague. Though the threat of the mills looms heavily on the citizens of Brill, you decide to first pursue Maggot Eye and his band of Rothhide Knolls to the north, as surely cutting off the supply of fresh corpses would prevent the Scourge at the mills from adding to their forces. While you're there, you also manage to spot a few doomweed and decide to collect it for Junior Apothecary Holland, but you also make a quick stop by the coast to collect a few Vilefin scales from the nearby Murlocs for Apothecary Johann. When you return to Brill to deliver the reagents to their respective apothecaries and to report the clearing of the graves to Magistrate Severin, Junior Apothecary Holland promptly pays you for your services, but Apothecary Johann once again asks for another ingredient, venom samples from the nightweb spiders to the east, as he wants to test if the contagious element from the venom, which was supposedly used in a very deadly and ancient plague, will work with his current concoction. Magistrate Severin, on the other hand, commends you for your service to the Dark Lady and asks you to collect a quick report from the nearby Deathguard way station, as he's concerned about the Bulwark, a small base of Forsaken to the east guarding the border to the Plaguelands, and wants to know if any Scourge have slipped past and into Tirisfal. At the way station, you speak to Deathguard Linnea, who tells you that while those at the Bulwark are able to prevent most of the Scourge from entering Tirisfal, occasionally there are a few who slip past. Linnea explains that it would be devastating for the Bulwark to be attacked from behind, so whenever you head east, she asks that you aid in patrolling that area, paying special attention to the Balnir Farmstead, where most of the escaped Scourge seem to be conglomerating. Reporting back to the Magistrate, he expresses that the news is troubling, but reassures you that though the Lich King and his minions are ceaseless in their assaults, we will not give in. Before you go, he also informs you of a high-ranking mage in Undercity, the capital of the Forsaken, by the name of Bethor Iceshard. Bethor, as he explains, is requesting an agent with proven worth against the Scourge, and though the Magistrate is unsure about the details of the mission, he's heard that it has to do with a wayward Lich, and though it sounds tempting, you decide to check in with Bethor at a later time, as the presence of the Scourge at Agamand Mills has grown too threatening to ignore. When you finally arrive at the mills, you find that it's guarded by swarms of skeletal soldiers and mages, and as you attempt to clear a path to the Agamands, you discover an unsent letter among the remains of the fallen. The letter, written by Thurman Agamand, the elder of the two Agamand brothers, is addressed to a Yvette Farthing, and it reads, "Dearest Yvette, I will entrust this letter to our fastest runner. I pray that he can find a way through the forces surrounding us, and I pray you read these words, for they are the last you will hear of me. My only comfort in these dark days is the relief I feel, knowing that you are free of my fate. I fear my father has made a grave error when he decided to remain and defend our home. The forces of the Scourge rage through Tirisfal glades, and although we're well fortified and well stocked, after the betrayal of my brother Devlin, we lack the strength and numbers to withstand their continued assault. If you receive this letter, Yvette, then know that Devlin is a traitor. Devlin despaired and sought an escape from our ill fortunes, and in doing so, he made a pact with the Scourge. I do not know what price was promised him for his betrayal, but I'm sure it was laced with lies. If you see my brother, then flee from him. He's a fiend. A few nights ago, he murdered 2 of our watchmen, and led a small group of Scourge through the breach, leading them to where many more of us slept. Their ambush was brutal. They slew 1/3 of us before we could take them down. Now we barely have enough men to watch our borders. It's only a matter of time before our wearying guard drops and the Scourge attack. And although I saw Devlin's face amidst the desperate men and gaunt-faced Scourge on that cursed night, he slipped away before I could catch him. He might be dead, or he might still live as an agent of the Scourge. Either way, he is a monster. Devlin warned us that if we tried to face the Scourge, then we were doomed. He told us this when they first entered Tirisfal glades, well before they encircled our home. Perhaps he was pleading with us to leave, or perhaps he was gloating. It was always hard to understand Devlin's motives. Since he was a child, he was a mystery to us. But he was right. We are doomed. The Agamand family line will end. Although I still live, I know I will soon be dead. I am not afraid, and I do not regret remaining with my family, but my last thoughts will be of you. Live on, my beloved Yvette, and I will find peace. Thurman. Thinking back on Thurman's story, you realize that perhaps this is why Coleman Farthing was so adamant in his request for Devlin's destruction. Tucking the letter away, you also recall a forsaken woman in Brill by the name of Yvette, and decide to take the letter to her once you finish clearing the mills. Eventually, after cutting through the waves of Scourge, you manage to dispatch the Agamands, making sure to be particularly cautious as you face the traitorous Devlin. Assuming the mills to be secure, you head to the southwest to finally deal with Captain Perrine and his detachment of Scarlet Crusaders, making sure to collect any undamaged insignias from their corpses. And when you return to Brill to inform Executor Zygand, he passes along your next assignment to travel to the southeast near the Balnir Farmstead, where you'll find another group of Crusaders led by Captain Vachon. Returning to Deathguard Dillinger, he makes it clear that he will not thank you for doing what is necessary in clearing the mills, but admits that the Death Guards of Tirisfal will remember your name. As you enter the inn to speak with Coleman, you first run into Yvette, who confirms that the letter was indeed written for her. She tells you that she begged Thurman to leave the mill, but that his family loyalty was too strong. She thanks you for delivering the letter, as she had always wondered on the fate of her lost love, but explains that as a Forsaken, she has new goals, and that love is not one of them, sadly expressing that that life is over, forever. When you pass on the Agamand remains to Coleman Farthing, he delightfully tells you that Devlin's bones will rest nicely on his mantle, and asks if you caught any hint of free will left within them as they were destroyed, hoping that they were able to feel fear before being smashed into oblivion. He also tells you that after relating your exploits against the Agamands to the magistrate, that he has asked to speak with you directly regarding the mills, and when you visit him, he tells you of the Agamand family crypt, which, overseen by a skeleton named Captain Dargle, has become the strongest point of the Scourge's foothold at the mills, as they've recently been using the crypt to raise the ancestors of the Agamands to bolster their forces. Thus, Severin's final task for you is to clear the crypt and to put down Captain Dargle. Returning to the mills, you find the crypt swarming with a mixture of walking corpses and wailing banshees, the raised ancestors of the Agamand family. And after fighting your way through the tight pass of the crypt, you progress into the deepest chamber, where you find and defeat the sinister Captain Dargle. When you return to town, the magistrate tells you that you struck a telling blow against the Scourge, and that your victory will not go unnoticed, sending you off with the reminder to continue the struggle as we all do, and that one day we will drive the Lich King himself from Azeroth. Putting the mills behind you, you decide to stop by the Forsaken capital of Undercity to speak with Bethor Ishard about that wayward lich the magistrate told you about earlier. When you find him, Bethor explains that there is a skilled lich living on the island at the center of Brightwater Lake to the north, and that though he is free-willed, he seems to believe that all other undead are slaves to the Scourge, sending his risen minions to attack anyone who comes close. However, since he retains his mind, as well as his necromantic skills, the Dark Lady will surely want him to join the Forsaken if possible. As he's proven difficult to approach, Bethor asks you to steal your way into his camp and acquire his spellbook to more easily discover his identity and to better assess his talents. On the way to Brightwater Lake, you decide to take a quick detour to the Balnir Farmstead to clear the grouping Scourge Deathguard Linnea told you about, and then up to the nearby hills, where you find and kill the Scarlet Crusaders led by Captain Vachon, the Executor Zygand ordered you to take care of, making sure to collect insignias just as before. When you finally reach Brightwater Lake, you find the central island to be filled with hungering dead, and though you must dispatch a few of them to reach the camp, once you reach it, you're able to successfully obtain the spellbook without drawing the Lich's attention, and decide to head back to Undercity. You make a brief pit stop by the Deathguard way station to inform Deathguard Linnea that you were able to clear the Scourge from the Balnir Farmstead, and after heading into the city to deliver the book to Bethor, the mage is surprised at what he learns. The Lich, or Gunther Arcanus as he knows him, was an old friend, with Bethor remarking that Gunther was a skilled necromancer in life, and judging by this book, he has grown even more powerful in death. He goes on to explain that in life, he and Gunther, along with their friend Thule Ravenclaw, belonged to the Kirin Tor, an organization of powerful mages. Though Thule went on to willingly serve the Scourge, Bethor and Gunther both fell to the plague, leading Bethor to assume that Gunther had either remained dead, or that he had been raised into service of the Lich King. Happy to know that his old friend is free, Bethor places an enchantment on the spellbook, one that, upon seeing it, will show Gunther that Bethor is both alive and free-willed. On your way to return the book, you also stop in Brill to bring the Scarlet insignias to Deathguard Burgess, but also to report to Executor Zygand, who tells you that your final target is Captain Melrash and his 2 bodyguards, who are operating from the ruined tower in northern Tirisfal just past Fail's Rest. Back at Brightwater Lake, rather than sneaking the book back into place, you decide to take the risk of hand-delivering it. Though Gunther initially assumes you to be a minion of the Scourge, he quickly recognizes Bethor's enchantment, and is surprised to learn that he's in Lordaeron. But to be absolutely sure that you are not one of the Lich King's servants, Gunther tells you of a powerful Scourge agent by the name of Lilith Nefara that uses the Bloody Altar on the southern coast of the island, and asks you to summon and kill her. Despite her strength, you manage to defeat her, and upon returning to Gunther, the Lich is astounded, saying, "I had believed I was the only undead with free will, but you have shown me that there are others who have broken the Lich King's domination." Having completed his test of loyalty, Gunther provides you with a nether gem, asking you to deliver it to Bethor so that the two can more easily communicate, as he has much to tell his old friend. Further north, you find the Scarlet Watchpost, where you finally encounter Captain Melrash. Though you're outnumbered by him and his bodyguards, you manage to defeat the 3 of them and make the decision to head back to Undercity, taking a brief detour to hunt down a few nightweb spiders and collect their venom samples for Apothecary Johann. Upon returning to Bethor, you give him the nether gem, allowing him to summon a visage of Gunther, who thanks you for guiding him to the Forsaken. Wrapping things up in Brill, you return to Executor Zygon, who thanks you for your aid in pushing back the Scarlet Crusade, sending you on your way by saying, "With ruthless fighters like you conquering in the name of the Forsaken, our race is one step closer to defeating Arthas once and for all." And finally, there's Apothecary Johann. After incorporating the venom, Johann asks you to perform one final test, this time on the Dwarven Mountaineer, also locked away in the tavern cellar. The dwarf, though repulsed by the sight of you, gladly accepts the drink before instantly falling to the floor, dead. And so, satisfied with this concoction, Johann promptly sends you to deliver his findings to an apothecary named Renfarrell, who's stationed at a place called the Sepulchre in Silverpine Forest. And after saying goodbye to the town of Brill, you begin heading southwest, ready to face whatever threats you may encounter in Silverpine and beyond. Thank you very much for watching. I kinda mentioned at the start of the video that this was going to be a classic focus lore video, but in the next part of this series, I'll actually be taking a closer look at the retail version of this zone to showcase all of the major differences that came alongside the Cataclysm world revamp. So if you're interested in seeing how the story of this zone has changed over the years, or if you're interested in seeing me cover the story of other zones in the future, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. But that's pretty much all I have, so thank you.